fact, the idea for this book came to me before the myth series was conceived, I think. I've been thinking about the story of Jesus, in fact, many of the Bible stories, all my life. And in fact, my book, my trilogy, His Dark Materials, retells the story, as perhaps some of you are aware, of the third chapter of the book of Genesis. So, in a way, I began with the Bible in that one, and I'm going into the New Testament in this one. But the immediate spur for this book was a conversation that I had on the stage of the National Theatre 7 years ago with the Archbishop of Canterbury. That was the time when the National Theatre was showing their production of His Dark Materials. And a little before that, somebody spotted the Archbishop, this was Rowan Williams, spotted him in the audience. And they'd said to him, "But what are you doing here? This is an atheist play. What are you supposed to?" And he said, "No, I'm very interested in it." Anyway, this got back to Nicholas Heitner, the director of the National Theatre, and he thought it would be a good idea to invite the Archbishop and me to have a conversation on the stage. And I was delighted to do that, because I'll talk to anyone. And, I didn't mean it like that. Anyway, we talked about the implications of that story, one of which is, of course, the power and the limitations, the moral limitations of organised religion. And he asked me why I hadn't spoken about Jesus in that book. And it was a good question, I didn't really know. But you have to have an answer. So I said, well, I'm saving you up for another book. Never occurred to me to do that before that moment. But once having said that, I felt I should think about it. So I thought about it for a while, and shortly after that, Jamie Bing, the publisher at Canongate, conceived this series of myths in which modern writers are invited to choose a myth of their own from ancient literature, or from literature or folk tales, indeed, from all over the world, to write in any way they like. And he asked me if I'd like to do one, and I said, yeah, I'd like to very much. And I thought about this story or that. I thought about Theseus and the Minotaur, but then somebody else picked that. And then I thought about something else, and I think somebody else picked that one too. But then the idea of putting the two things together, the story I was intending to write about Jesus and the idea of doing it doing a myth. And I thought, well, why don't I do Jesus as a myth? Because it's a very good, it sort of qualifies as a myth in that there's no original single author. You know, it would be hard to think of Pride and Prejudice as a myth, because we know who wrote that book, and it's not really like a myth in other ways. But the story of Jesus and the other stories in the Bible, in fact, a couple of Old Testament stories were published in that myth series before this one. So there's that. It's a story that belongs to everyone, doesn't have a single named author, as it were. And also because I was brought up in the Christian faith. My grandfather was a clergyman. I spent every Sunday of my childhood and youth singing the hymns and reciting the prayers and listening to the sermons and hearing the stories. So I knew it all very well. And it belonged to me even though I don't believe in a God anymore. The stories still belong to me. They belong to all of us. They belong to us whether we're Christians or not. They belong to the world. And I thought that I had the right to tell this story. And so that's how it began, anyway.
And